Hello to everyone. I want to thank you for your participation in this fourth of a series of 5 discussions on cultural heritage in crisis. The initiative on religion, law and diplomacy at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University and Foreign Affairs Institute of Greece are organizing this series of conversation to explore the current condition of cultural heritage in crisis. Framing within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the conversation series brings together cultural heritage experts, policymakers, practitioners, and influencers to share knowledge, experiences, and recommendations about sustainable cultural heritage practices at a moment of great risk and at a time of renewed possibility. The first conversation of this series was about why does cultural heritage matter for humanity? And the participants were Dr. Bonnie Doherty from Harvard Law School, who is specialized in world heritage and armed conflict, and Dr. Marios Notas, head of the European Communication Institute based in Athens, Greece. Moderator was Dr. Elizabeth Prodromou from Tufts University, a major pillar of this effort. And at this point, I would like to thank her again, and her team, of course, Cecilia Rosman, François Vin, and Brad Macomber, for all of their efforts to the realization of this event. Also, from the Greek side, Reverend Aristarchos Grekas, and last but not least, Areti Tsoukalas. Without her, everything will be much more difficult for me on this. The second conversation was about public-private partnerships, social impact investing, and cultural heritage preservation. And the participants were Ms. Clay Wallace-Aramian from Culturalytics, Haris Siampanis, CEO of the Binaki Museum in Greece, and Dr. Stefanos Valianatos, Director for International Relations at the Hellenic Foundation for Culture. The third was about religious cooperation and cultural heritage sustainability. The participants were His Eminence Archbishop Elpidophoros of America, Mrs. Tess Davis, the Executive Director of Antiquities Coalition, and Mazen Karam, the CEO of Bethlehem Development Foundation. Today, we will discuss cultural heritage and diplomacy. We have with us Professor of International Relations at the Kadir Has University of Turkey, Dr. Dimitri Triantafyllou, and Dr. Tim Winters, Professor of Cultural Heritage Studies in the University of Western Australia. Also, Mr. Konstantinos Vlasis, Deputy Minister of the Hellenic Ministry of Foreign Affairs, will give us his views in a recorded video message, as will also do Dr. Athanasios Dimopoulos, Rector of the National Kapodistrian University of Athens. So having said that, I want to thank you all to be with us. And as for our audience, please feel free to submit any questions you have to our guests. Finally, to begin, I will ask to the participants to make a 5 minutes introductory statement related to the topic of our discussion. And after that, we will proceed with the questions, some of them from our audience. But first, we will see the recorded video message from Deputy Minister Vlasis. Thank you, and in a few minutes we'll be with you again.
Esteemed professors, dear participants, it is a pleasure to address this conversation series on cultural heritage, co-organized by the Initiative on Religion, Law and Diplomacy at the Fletcher School, Tufts University, and the Foreign Affairs Institute. During this time of crisis, it is more vital than ever to discuss and explore new ideas on how to effectively protect and preserve cultural heritage as part of our identity, as part of our humanity. Greece has always attached great importance to religious and cultural diplomacy. These invaluable foreign policy tools that constitute the so-called soft diplomacy contribute greatly in achieving peace and reconciliation in our modern globalized environment. They bridge differences among states, facilitate dialogue and mutual understanding, and open new, unexplored channels of communication. Sadly, this discussion is pertinent as we all have recently witnessed how these tools can be used in a non-constructive manner. The entire Western world has stood united in condemning Turkey's decisions to convert Hagia Sophia into a mosque. By limiting the access 85 years after its transformation to a museum, Turkey is blatantly disrespecting the monument's ecumenical character and global significance as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Hagia Sophia is not a bilateral issue between Greece and Turkey. Hagia Sophia is a symbol of interreligious dialogue and mutual respect over the centuries. Religion and diplomacy have become more and more interrelated since the end of the 20th century. Religion has emerged as the key towards tolerance and respect among diverse people in today's world, in the changing nature of modern conflict. Greece has placed religious diplomacy high on its agenda, not only by joining recent initiatives such as the International Religious Freedom Alliance, a United States-led initiative in 2019, but also by hosting two international conferences on religious and cultural pluralism and peaceful coexistence in the Middle East. By taking the lead and bringing together ministers and religious leaders from a turbulent region, we aspired in creating a platform for dialogue and networking among different religions and cultural communities. In the field of cultural diplomacy, the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs engages also with other partners through educational and cultural programs which are organized annually and host young people of Greek origin from all over the world, giving them a unique chance to connect with their roots. In Greece, we say that culture and tourism is our heavy industry. Our cultural footprint is huge, and we feel the pride but also the responsibility that comes with it. Additionally, during the recent COVID-19 lockdown, we have launched an online platform called Στα Ελληνικά, in cooperation with Center of Hellenic Studies at Simon Fraser University and the generous support of Stavros Niarchos Foundation, which offers the opportunity for young people, young Greeks living abroad, to learn the language, culture, and mythology of their motherland. Furthermore, a series of cultural events in an essential part of daily work of our embassies and consulates abroad, where we open our doors to the public to experience Greece, its past and present through art, science and gastronomy. Greece has always borne the heavy title of being one of the cradles of civilization. It is the birthplace of the Olympic Games and the marathon race, events that have endured through time, have taken a global dimension and inspired to this day millions of people worldwide to the values of noble emulation and fair play. These two principles are a characteristic example of the universality and timelessness of the Hellenic heritage. Hence, our country is at the forefront of a number of initiatives in the field of preservation of cultural heritage, such as the triennial adoption by the United Nations General Assembly for a resolution against the illicit trafficking and the return of cultural property to its countries of origin. The protection of cultural heritage from climate changes is yet another field which we feel that needs to be broadly discussed and addressed as it concerns us all. On this note, I want to thank you once more for honoring me with your kind invitation. It was a pleasure to participate, even though through this videotaped message due to prior commitments. I am confident that the conversation series on cultural heritage will produce fruitful discussions and will yield significant as well as useful conclusions. Thank you very much.
I am Professor Meletios Dimopoulos, Director of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and I would like to welcome you to the webinar Cultural Heritage in Crisis, which is co-organized by the Initiative on Religion, Law and Diplomacy at the Fletcher School at Tufts University and Foreign Affairs Institute in Greece. I would like to point out the importance of student participation from several universities, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, the National Kapodistrian University of Athens, the Harvard Law School, and the European Communication Institute. The participation of students to this conversation, which reflects to the current conditions of the COVID-19 pandemic and focuses to the substantial cultural heritage practices at a moment of great risk, but also a time of renewed possibility. I believe that this is an emerging need to maintain the cultural heritage because it is unique and unreplaceable and loads the modern culture with the responsibility of its maintenance and its preservation to local and global level. Furthermore, we should all try to promote our cultural heritage during the COVID-19 crisis. Daily habits such as hygiene conditions and social practices such as social cohesion contribute to the confrontation of the pandemic. We should stress that human rights and freedom are timeless foundation of the culture. It is also very important to respect the national monuments which constitute evidence of our history, and people should maintain their cultural heritage as a factor of peace and stability. With that, I would like to close and wish every success for this conversation series, Cultural Heritage in Crisis. Thank you very much.
Well, we thank Deputy Minister Vlasis. And now, Dr. Triantafyllou, maybe you can proceed to your initial statement, please.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you and the Foreign Affairs Institute and the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy for inviting me to this initiative. And I'm particularly honored because I'm a Fletcherite. I have a MALD from Fletcher and a PhD from Fletcher, which I acquired a long time ago, 1996. But it's always thrilling and gratifying to speak to Fletcher students, among others. You know, this whole issue about culture is very interesting, and listen to the message by the Deputy Minister very carefully. And when you mentioned the Hagia Sophia, I should say that I happened to be there the Friday when the announcement was made, the court decision was taken about converting into a mosque, and then the presidential decree basically saying that it will become a mosque. And it was a very interesting experience. I happened to be there to be on a television program, the evening news, a channel in Greece, and it was very interesting in the sense that going in front of the Hagia Sophia and having a crowd, not very big, a few hundreds of very, very radical, basically Islamists celebrating and chanting a number of chants, and in particular hearing Allahu Akbar being chanted in front of the Hagia Sophia was a very strange experience that made me sort of well up, my eyes well up, and I was trying to control a bit my sobs. And it's not so much, I mean, yes, I identify to the Hagia Sophia and what it is and what it represents as a Greek Orthodox and as a Greek academic living and working in Istanbul for the last 10 years, where I've seen society change over the last 10 years. I've seen society change. And what Turkey was solidly a secular state, even though it was imposed secularization, has slowly been transformed and is slowly transforming, where secularization is still the norm. And therefore, and in that sense, having the Hagia Sophia as a museum and as a monument to humanity and under the aegis of UNESCO, protected heritage of humanity, made sense because therefore it represented some sort of had an ecumenical message, having been both a church and a mosque historically. But this change could imply other things about the future of cultural heritage in Turkey, which we need to consider. And it made me think about cultural heritage per se, in the sense that when do we think about cultural heritage and its protection? And whose cultural heritage? Because usually we take a very national perspective regarding it. It's linked to our culture. It's linked to our culture and our identity. And as Greeks, we heard the deputy minister just talk about what Greece is doing, but this is part of the DNA. Hellenism dates back for thousands of years and has contributed both to our identity over time and as well as Western and world civilization. And therefore, it is relevant for us that and Greece is very active with it, the UNESCO and the UN, the UNESCO conventions, on the Intergovernmental Committee on the means of prohibiting and protecting the illicit import, export, and transfer and ownership of cultural property, active in terms of the 1954 Hague Convention for the protection of cultural property. The minister mentioned the United Nations General Assembly resolution, which Greece sponsors every 3 years against illicit trafficking and so on, and a number of other initiatives. Even the marathon or the Olympic Games are cultural in that sense, right? As well as the notion of having a European capital of culture. But you know, in a basically homogeneous society, which is what the Greek society is, even though that's changing over the last few years with population shifts and so on. And it's natural to want to protect the cultural heritage linked to Hellenism, the ancient Greek history, and then later on Byzantine Empire, the churches, and so on. And sometimes we tend to forget that we also do damage. And we're not as good as, I think, everyone in the world as protecting cultural heritage. Because it might belong to some other faith, and therefore we disregard it or it's deemed less important as opposed to our heritage or mainstream heritage. And B, because, you know, because of the way of the world. We all live in big urban settlements. About 50% of the world's population lives in urban settlements. It's going to go to 60% in 2030, estimates say by 75% by 2050. And as we all live in this big multicultural, intercultural cities with, we produce pollution and our carbon imprint is big, well, our cultural monuments, at least the ones that are visible, tend to suffer. And then there is this perennial battle between economic development, growth, modernity, and so on, as we expand our urban centers, and what's underneath, because both all over Greece, take Athens and other cities around the Mediterranean, they're built on history, right? The present is built on history, and as we're trying to build the future, we're building it on history, and therefore there's a balance that needs to be maintained, which sometimes we're not very good at maintaining. And it makes me think that apart from all these initiatives that exist, and there's international conventions and institutions that are out there to protect cultural heritage, as well as big international NGOs such as Europa Nostra, ICOMOS, and others that all have relevant national chapters in most countries. COVID-19 has maybe made us think that there's another dimension linked to it as well. And then the minister sort of alluded to it at the end with this new initiative that Greece did. I mean, there was a meeting, a pre-summit meeting last year in September at the United Nations, before the General Assembly, during the Climate Action Summit, of linking cultural heritage to climate action. And here the relevance is that if one looks at some of the reports coming out of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which monitors the rise in global temperature every 2 or 3 years, it was a report that came out in 2018, which suggests, and it's about maintaining the temperature not at no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, because if it goes to 2, then water levels will rise and it will have repercussions on culture. And specifically in the report, when the Mediterranean was mentioned, one of the direct impacts of climate change in this part of the world will be the city of Alexandria in Egypt, which is not very far from here, where the whole Corniche, this beautiful historical city, the whole Corniche, which is the coast of the coastline of Alexandria, will all be submerged, and something like 3 to 4 million people will have to move inland because that part of the city will disappear together with the heritage that comes with it. And it's not very far. We know about Venice and what happens to it every year. So it's interesting that maybe we need to rethink a little bit about the notion of cultural heritage and its protection, and linking it also to this very real issue of climate change, which affects us all. And maybe I'll continue more with the questions.
Thank you so much, Professor. I will begin with this one of your remarks that everyone has his cultural heritage. Okay, so apparently he has to defend it. So this brings me to the first question. Since everyone has his cultural heritage, how does it relate to soft power? And if cultural heritage is a lever in international relations, is it conciliatory or tending to generate confrontations? What do you think about that?
That's a good question. I think it's both. It has the potential of being conciliatory, and we have examples of this. And even in our part of the world, even on this poor, long-suffering island of Cyprus, which is still divided. You have the only divided capital in Europe still there, in Nicosia. And there's been an attempt at dialogue, at finding a solution for a number of years now. And part of that process has been the creation of a number of technical committees among experts from both sides on education and on gender issues. And the one that's been the most successful is the Technical Committee on Cultural Heritage, led by a Greek Cypriot and a Turkish Cypriot. And that committee, like all committees, are co-led, and has been able to mobilize funds from the United Nations, from the European Union and other funders to restore buildings across the island that have some cultural value. So from churches, Greek churches, to Armenian and Maronite churches, because you have small minorities of Armenians and Maronites in Cyprus, as well as mosques and other religious sites and buildings of a Muslim nature. And I think some 33 or so of these projects have actually been restored, or in the way the technical committee is leading in terms of the restoration. And there, this is a very conciliatory process, right? You have the Greek Cypriot and the Turkish Cypriot leaders. The Greek Cypriot is much older than the Turkish Cypriot. There's also a learning thing. I've heard the Turkish Cypriot co-head, Ali Tuncay, talk in the warmest terms in terms of what he is learning from his Greek Cypriot colleague, Takis Dimitriou, and how they work together at showing Cypriots of Greek and Turkish origin that you can work together even without a resolution to the Cyprus issue, and across generations as well. So there you see the peace-building qualities of cultural heritage. On the other hand, we talked a little bit about Turkey before, which is, again, it's a culture, it's a country that's not as homogeneous, say, as Greece, It has other groups within it. Some are religious minorities, some are not. But nevertheless, there's a dominant culture, which is a Sunni Islam culture, where there's been an attempt to maintain a balance between all the different cultures and the heritage that that country has. But given developments in Turkey over the last few years, and especially in the last few weeks, we see an attempt politically to impose or maybe make secular Islam sort of the ideology of the state, as opposed to secularism, which secularism at least allowed, because secularism is a religion in itself. It's a religion in itself, but it allowed all groups to sort of live together in peace. And that might have repercussions on culture as you try to impose your vision. So the conversion of Hagia Sophia becomes that, and it can be confrontational. And it's been happening with a number of other churches also in Greece, and periodically too, over the last few weeks. So there have been small incidents that are not really reported of attacks, not organized necessarily, but obviously by people that on Armenian sites, on Armenian churches and so on. There have been 2 or 3 attacks, and there's concern in the Armenian community in Istanbul and elsewhere in Turkey. So it could mobilize towards working together, conciliatory as you said, but it could also lead to greater fanaticism. And this is something that one should be aware of.
So let me ask you again, in this context, how can diplomacy balance the two narratives or the two tendencies? I mean, the conciliatory and the confrontational.
Well, first of all, by stressing the universality of cultural heritage and culture in general, and so if we take the Greek case, by making sure you work with international organizations and the different initiatives that Greece takes, stressing this. But I think when it comes to cultural property, cultural heritage, given the potential for confrontation, I think one also needs to work, something that we don't hear much about, at levels beyond the state, at the civil society level, to mobilize, to raise awareness. And maybe in that sense, climate change might be a good way to raise awareness, given its existentialist nature. It affects each and every one of us. And therefore cultural heritage comes into that. You need to mobilize society to be aware that this is a relevant issue, and therefore, given its importance, in particular in countries or cultures where this is part of their DNA and history, more concerted efforts need to be made. Maybe this should be part of a wider effort. I mean, interesting, again, if I refer back to the Deputy Minister's message, it's interesting. Some of the last initiatives he talked about is about, I think he said Enelimika, this program, this platform of having Greeks or up from abroad of Greek heritage to converse and talk in Greece. It's more than that, right? I think culture and cultural heritage is more than that. And so an awareness at the societal level, an awareness at the level of younger generations, and them acting as a sort of a bottom-up approach to pressure government, to pressure the state, to make this issue even more relevant and important, might be a way forward. And also given the fact that, as I mentioned, climate change, which affects the Mediterranean, the Aegean, I mean, it affects, doesn't matter what shore one is on, whether it's Greek shores or Turkish shores or Egyptian shores, the effects of climate change is the same. One can see the potential of platforms, of projects that are multilateral in promoting an agenda to put the issue of cultural protection and cultural heritage protection at the forefront.
But, sorry to insist, but do you think that society or the civil society organization are always for peace, for conciliation? I mean, in Turkey, there is a portion of the population, about 20%, who are Kurdish. So they have their cultural heritage, and they are in conflict with the state, with Turkey, and the Sunni narrative for almost 30 years or more. So which are the levers that can sustain peace and conciliation and this unity efforts than other than I don't know, the government, diplomacy?
Yeah, but it's interesting because you raise the Kurds, but the Kurds, you know, it's ethnic group that the largest part is Muslim anyway. They're Sunni Muslims as well. It's not as important in their identity. What's important is that they are Kurds. But I think it's interesting, paradoxically, what unites all the groups in terms of wanting to protect their culture and therefore cultural protection, and that's, is the fact that there is this battle happening, and I mentioned this, it's happening in Greece, it's happening in Turkey, as you know, it has to do with economic development and the emphasis on you know, making sure that the urban centers become centers of the 21st or 22nd century and whatever, and you end up sacrificing cultural heritage. And if one goes around Istanbul, like I've been there for the last 10 years, I'm shocked sometimes to see the state of many Ottoman era monuments, at the way they have not been kept, or they've been totally marginalized because a bridge or a road or an overpass had to be built next to it, right? And because if the ambition is to create a modern city, like Dubai in the Gulf, but Dubai is built on sand and Istanbul is built on history, this is what will happen. And there, the damage is irrespective of whether one is a Muslim and their culture being destroyed, or whether one is an Orthodox or a Jew or an Armenian. And so one of the problems with the notion of protecting cultural heritage has to do with modernity, has to do with mass tourism, has to do, and many times tourism and culture go together, right? There's this whole notion of cultural tourism anyway. And so that's one aspect of what Turkey is facing, which is an aspect I think countries like Greece and others are also facing. And they're also there in terms, as you said, the Sunni identity being sort of becoming more and more dominant. There are paradoxes. So the Hagia Sophia losing its luster, and it's not so much its conversion to a mosque, but because it's becoming a mosque, it means that in a mosque you cannot have icons or frescoes or anything like that. What do you do with them? And there are many cases of this happening in other Hagia Sophias around Turkey. On the other hand, you have Panagia Soumela, the church of the Pontic Greeks in Trabzon, which Mass had started about 10 years ago there. For the last 3 years, it's been shut down because restoration work being done, and it's supposed to be reopened for Mass on the 15th of August, led by the Patriarch. And so there's a paradox there too. We shall see, but this is the reality of Turkey right now, right? And on the other hand, you also have, even though it's not as vocal a society as ours, you also have a number of not only experts in this field, in the field of cultural heritage, historians and others saying that, you know, we need to preserve what the country is about. But also, I think, among the population in itself, most Turks are not necessarily practicing. There is a vocal minority that's practicing that, and then part of that does not understand about other cultures, the fanatics, as I say. But I think, I mean, let me give you a small example with Hagia Sophia and polls that have been taken in Turkey recently. There was one poll which had something like 47% of Turks that were polled in favor of the conversion of the monument into a mosque. And in that poll, among the governing party members that were polled, only 70% agreed with that decision. And among those polled that agreed with this decision from the MHP, which is the coalition partner on the right, the far right, only 49% of them agreed, which is interesting because it also means that you might be pious, but you also understand and want to respect the culture of others and therefore protect that heritage, right? So it's a much more, it's not as clear cut, and that's why it's very difficult to judge what is happening there. There is an imposition, it's a very top-down system, but it's much more nuanced than in maybe other countries where Sunni Islam is a dominant religion or Shiite Islam and their smaller minority groups and their cultural protection and heritage really suffers. For now, this might change in the future, right?
Yeah, but I think that in government level, the thinking is much more rigid. So this question is for you and for Dr. Winters. How is cultural and religious heritage understood in terms of sovereignty, and how it is related to the practice of state diplomacy?
Well, it's understood. It depends how governments and leaders use it and implement it. I mean, if they want to stress it, that they can use it. And let me go back to Cyprus again, where with the technical committee, which has been very successful. I was hosting a meeting of Cypriot civil society a few years ago, where Ali Tuncay, that I mentioned before, the Turkish Cypriot head of this technical committee, made a presentation and explained with a video of which monuments, both Orthodox monuments as well as Muslim monuments, had been preserved and restored. And one of the participants, a teacher, very active in civil society, a Turkish Cypriot participant, was very upset with him, saying, "Why do you restore mosques? Why do you restore mosques? Because our heritage as Turkish Cypriots is that we are secular." And the fact that mosques are being restored at a time when, from Turkey proper, with the settlers and the policy of the state, religion plays a more dominant role, you are trying to Islamize us, which is not exactly the intention of the technical committee. It's about fair restoration of all. So it's how it's instrumentalized. My point is how this is instrumentalized by the ruling elite, that it can become an issue. So in Turkey's case, it might be there. We might be on the way of this becoming an issue. It's also based on the longevity of the government, and so on. Things might change again, right? It's not very clear-cut, but it was very interesting, the reaction of this Turkish Cypriot teacher saying, "Man, this is not me. This is not me." And Tuncay had to explain to her, but this is what cultural heritage is. And for the Greek Cypriots, heritage also goes through these religious monuments. So what is heritage? How is it expressed? It usually has to do with religion as well, more than anything. And so it really depends on the policies of the states. Just like I'm sure Tim would have to tell us about how the Chinese do this, for example, in terms of how they play up on the issue of cultural protection and heritage.
Okay, so let's turn to Dr. Winters. What's your answer in this question? So please, Professor Winter, please proceed to your 5 minutes introductory statement, and then we can go to the questions and answers.
Sure. Thanks, Loukas, and thank you very much for your chairing of this session. I'm sure it's going to be a stimulating discussion. And thanks. I'd also like to start just by thanking the Fletcher School at Tufts and the Greek Department of Ministry of Foreign Affairs for what has been a fascinating set of conversations over this week, and I'm sure hopefully today and the one in the next coming days will also be equally stimulating and useful for people working in different contexts, whether they're studying or in professional practice. So my interest in this topic stems back a good 20-25 years. My work is largely focused on the political and economic dimensions of heritage in a number of contexts, particularly in Asia. And I guess I can start by saying that heritage has been part of the interface and that entangling between nationalism and internationalism in the modern era. So if we think about the modern conservation movement, nationalism and internationalism have been part of that process as modern conservation and heritage movements have evolved in the last 150 years or so. But in reading the politics of heritage, we've been much more comfortable, it seems, to naturally gravitate towards the politics of heritage at the national level and the nation state. But when it gets to beyond the nation state and the international scale, things seem to become a bit more murky and a bit more unclear. So I've been particularly fascinated in that ongoing kind of tension and compatibility between nationalism and internationalism, but also the ways in which heritage figures into international diplomacy, public diplomacy, and geopolitics, and the shifting world order that we've seen in the last 2 decades or so. So I first studied that in the context of Cambodia, a post-war, post-genocidal context where a number of countries came together. And then I've looked at it in a number of other conflict and post-conflict countries, and also a number of settings where there's a heavy emphasis on international cooperation. So a number of years ago, I started working on and around the theme of heritage diplomacy as a way to bring these different themes together. And there's many strands to that concept as an analytical frame that I think is somewhat different to cultural diplomacy for reasons I won't go into now. But one of the things I think is important is to understand how, why, where, and when heritage cooperation happens, how diplomacy, how geopolitics has shaped the modern conservation movement and the modern heritage movement around the world. What issues and what causes come to be the focal point of cooperation. And we often speak about the international community, but what does that really mean? And I think it's something that might come up later. So for example, why is it that so much attention focuses on countries like Iraq in the Middle East, but at the same time, a case like Yemen has passed largely unnoticed in the last 6 or 7 years, and the immense destruction that has happened there, somewhat tragically, I would say. Doesn't seem to be in the attention of much international heritage or conservation agencies, and I think there's diplomatic, geopolitical reasons why that has been the case. We might also ask, for example, why and in what ways does international cooperation around heritage and the diplomatic dimensions of it unwittingly advance forms of nationalism, which is seems to be a growing problem in contemporary affairs today. How does it also advance abusive forms of cultural power against minority cultures and minority groups in different countries? And I've seen that over a number of countries and a number of contexts over the years. So I think those are types of things that a more careful and rigorous analysis of the diplomatic and geopolitical dimensions of conservation and heritage today can unravel, or not unravel, sorry, reveal and unpack. Now, I would say in terms of this conversation, I'd say there's 2 things I guess I want to sort of bring to the table early on. And the first is how might heritage diplomacy as a topic and as a concept help us understand new ways of developing mutual understandings, international dialogue across borders, which is much needed today. In what ways does heritage diplomacy afford forms of cosmopolitanism and cosmopolitan cultures? There's an emphasis that seems to be happening in a number of agencies and governments around the world towards a discourse of shared heritage and cultural roots. What are the new possibilities of that language that's been in place for a number of years but seems to be gaining momentum in different situations and contexts today? So those are optimistic possibilities for the future, but at the same time we also need to be attentive towards the ways in which heritage is fast becoming a tool within foreign policy contexts and for particularly within states with expansionist ambitions, and we're seeing that in a number of contexts, particularly in Asia, where we have some rising powers, notably India and China, but also closer to your region in Turkey, where there's middle powers that are certainly using, and Iran and Saudi Arabia, that are using culture, religion, and heritage within their kind of regional aspirations for gaining influence well, essentially, yeah, influence within the region in different ways. So I've been working on that around the idea of geocultural power, which is hopefully something we might get into in the discussion, and in particular in the context of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which has been branded and framed as a revival of the Silk Roads for the 21st century. Most immediately, I think, in the context of this conversation, what we're seeing is a dialogue between Greece and China, for example, that's being articulated around Silk Road and maritime Silk Road histories, which brings to the fore ideas about civilizational histories and connectivities, which is a fascinating shift in the discourse of heritage. And we have good reasons to be optimistic about that, but there's also some challenges there, I think, around the ways in which states are co-opting those histories and those ideas of culture and connectivity. So I'll leave it there, but hopefully that gives us, gives you a sense of what I've been working on and how I can contribute to this discussion.
Thank you very much. But let me insist a little bit more on this notion of heritage diplomacy. Which are the tools of heritage diplomacy? Because it's a relatively new term. How right. does this diplomacy relate to soft power? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and often it is seen as in terms of soft power. And I think, well, firstly, cultural diplomacy is often seen as a thing that governments do and agencies do. And non-state actors participate in. I guess one of the ways I'm trying to advance the idea of heritage diplomacy is to see it as a form of analysis rather than a practice in itself. And it can be a practice, obviously, that I think agencies, for example, I was at the Smithsonian Institute a number of years ago, and I said, spoke to the director, I said, do you think you're engaged in heritage diplomacy? And he said, I've never really thought about it in that way, but absolutely this is what we do. But within an analytical context, I would say that it hopefully points to the ways in which history, culture, religion, and obviously how these become manifest as heritage are being mobilized and co-opted for political purposes, both domestically and internationally. And that international cooperation has always been at the heart of the modern conservation movement, particularly after the Second World War, where there was so much emphasis on rebuilding European cities and restoring trust and goodwill across a number of countries. This was the foundations of UNESCO, and it remains so today, to build these international partnerships which suggest the benefits of harnessing trust and tolerance and respect and mutual dialogue. But that doesn't mean to say that that's a harmonious picture that language often suggests to us. So it's offering a critical eye to really what's going on in that space. So it brings together a number of disciplinary perspectives that tries to understand both how diplomacy, international politics, and geopolitics shape heritage and its associated forms of conservation, but also the ways in which the latter figure into these new forms of state power, particularly today. So your question about how does it relate to soft power? In many ways it might well do, but I would also question that distinction in the sense that it's often heritage as a form of spatial and social governance. It's also linked to infrastructure, and this is what we're seeing in Belt and Road. So for example, for example, Japanese aid since the Second World War has often focused on World Heritage sites, and there's these require in some places like Southeast Asia a heavy investment in infrastructure programs, whether it's electricity, airports, water, sewage, hotel zones, so on and so forth. These can be multi-million, if not multi-billion-dollar contracts. And so heritage becomes part of this much more complicated process of aid and cooperation, which is, I think, far more than soft power, particularly within the ways in which it's been understood within a post-Nye definition. And where it really becomes important, I think, to break down that notion of soft and hard is through the ways in which we're moving to digital economies and the digital entanglements that heritage and tourism, for example, are being rapidly folded into. So, for example, China is now the sort of dominating international tourism around the world. There's 150 million or so Chinese tourists that were coming outbound before the COVID arrived upon the 2020 scene. And this represents an enormous platform for China to internationalize its digital ecosystems. And these are going to be linked to international payment systems, social networking, so on and so forth, in ways that are very, very compelling for countries like Greece, Turkey, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, so on and so forth. But that's the degree to which these countries will have to respond to the economic lure and the attraction that the Chinese tourist brings, and how that feeds and fuels the connections in towards a more China-centric economy in the 21st century. And so tourism is playing a big role in that. And obviously for countries such as Greece or Italy, heritage tourism is fundamentally important and central to those growing economies. And I think that's going to be even more important in a post-COVID world, where something like Belt and Road, the architecture of cooperation, will move more and more to people-to-people connectivities.
Thanks again. Let me stick with China as an example. We see that China is a little bit more assertive towards its effort to expand its influence, not only by infrastructure, but also in cultural matters. So this how to say it now, this use as a tool of cultural heritage is going toward peace building, or it is another tool as other classical tools of diplomacy and in this struggle for world power?
Well, I mean, that's another great question. I mean, and I think we are yet to fully have that picture revealed. China's Belt and Road Initiative rests upon this idea of reviving the Silk Roads for the 21st century. And certainly what we're seeing is the Silk Road as a historical narrative of Eurasian connectivity that is based around ideas of mutual exchange, whether it's cultural, technological, economic, trade, that played out over a number of centuries, and that this was a peaceful history of trade and exchange. And so China's using that as a platform to say that this represents evidence of China's peaceful history in the world. So the Silk Road provides a platform through which an international China that's connected to other regions, other countries, can demonstrate that it has benign intentions, that it's a win-win cooperation, and it's built on harmonious trade and exchange, and mutual learning and mutual respect, a shared destiny through which everybody will benefit. Obviously, there are many, many instances on the ground where that seems definitely not to be the case, and so the degree to which that plays out in different contexts is something I think we need to watch over the coming years, and there are good reasons why this, as a platform for international cooperation, absolutely resonates with the intentions of UNESCO and other organizations as they've been set up in the second half of the 20th century to build those types of relationships. But with one state leading it, particularly one, certainly the most powerful and influential in Asia today, that brings some very, very foreboding consequences potentially. So I think, yes, that's a trajectory that I think we need to monitor carefully. And I think there are many in China who are aware of that. within academia and within a number of cultural institutions that are aware of the need to tread carefully and to engage with their regional partners in a sensitive way. But it's definitely not always the case, and we're seeing the asymmetrical relationships of heritage that characterized international cooperation in the 20th century and the 19th century sort of playing out today within the Eurasian landscape of Belt and Road.
So one more question for now. How do you see the world today from your experience and from your part of the world? Do you see it as, let's say, three pillars, which one is the Western world, the Islamic world, and China's world, and with another factor, the international organizations as an intermediator, or this image is totally wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated question, right? In terms of, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I think where is the West going in terms of both who's providing leadership in that and I mean, the 20th century was about US hegemony, rolling out ideas and geocultures such as democracy and development. The US seems to be retreating from that stage at present. Whether it will return to that, if Biden gets elected, we will see. Obviously, the European Union is very much struggling to manage its identity and its purpose in the world today, and how it can affect some regional influences beyond its own geographies. In Asia, I think what we're seeing is China certainly doesn't have that region to itself. We've got India that is very much in competition as much as it is in collaboration with China. So there's a complex multipolar world that's kind of developing, and yeah, who's providing leadership in that, and those international agencies that as I mentioned earlier, that we often talk about the international community, but what does that really mean in a multipolar world, and where those who are taking leadership are no longer either interested or necessarily financially able to do that. I mean, COVID is, I think a number of observers are suggesting East Asia might well be the long-term winner in the COVID epidemic future. And what will that mean in terms of international leadership across a number of public sectors? I think that's going to be an important issue to follow. And I think that will filter through to the ways in which cultural aid figures into international cooperation, where a number of Western countries seem to be retreating from the humanities and culture and public funding of culture. That's coming to the fore for those countries, that, particularly in Asia, that are seeing that this is central to identity building at the national level, but also central to the economies of countries and the sense of sort of national cohesion. And China is, through the Silk Roads, is definitely sort of seeing itself as a civilizational state that's reclaiming its place in history. And so the Silk Road enables it to do that and sees itself within a larger geography, regional connectivity. But as I say, I mean, there's other countries also competing into that space, such as India, but also Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, that make it for a complicated situation.
Okay, perhaps I have an objection about Turkey, because historically its heritage, its cultural heritage is not so strong, but this is a personal opinion.
Yeah, but that, can you explain that?
Which are the great civilizations in the human history?
Right. No, I'm certainly not suggesting that Turkey ranks alongside. No.
So which place in the world can claim a middle power like Turkey on the cultural level? Not so much.
No, but I think obviously, and Erdogan, the revival of sort of neo-Ottoman inclination seemed to be happening in a way that is invoking ideas of history and culture that are sort of extending beyond Turkey's boundaries, and so that's butting up against other countries in the region, and this is potentially a source of distinct frictions. And as I say, Iran, Saudi Arabia, there's similar things happening across that region. That whilst we've got agencies like UNESCO or ISESCO who are trying to push international cooperation, there's state-driven agendas there that are making that a complicated space.
Since we have this conversation, let me ask about Australia and how in this country is felt this friction between civilizations and cultural confrontations, and also the Chinese influence to Australia.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I'm not sure if the ideas of Chinese influence gravitates around debates and discussions around civilization. It's much more to do with the pragmatics of technology, national security, surveillance, and other issues, and the ways in which China's believed to be interfering in the economy and its public institutions. So yes, Australia finds itself in a difficult place in terms of, particularly with a retreating US. There are, in this part of the world, there are regional architectures of cooperation. Belt and Road is being countered by the Indo-Pacific and the Quad. These are kind of discourses of regional cooperation with Japan, India, the US, and Australia coming together in a way to try and contain China's growing influence in both maritime and terrestrial affairs. So Australia is very much still attaching itself, through its growing suspicions towards China, attaching itself to these this alliance with Japan, India, and trying to find, and the US, and trying to find values and ideals that bind these countries together, which often is a bit more cryptic than a number of experts might suggest.
I have to tell you that we have a great number of questions, but we don't have too much time. So I would ask both of you if you can address how heritage diplomacy affects living communities associated to those cultural and religious sites. Can you give some positive and some negative examples on how heritage diplomacy is used for sustainability and remembrance versus cleansing and erasure? Let's begin with you, Dimitri.
You're not giving me any time to think. I mean, again, I would go to my Cyprus example, which I think there is a lot of happening out there, and there's an understanding at the level of communities. You know, the technical committee has been successful because it also implies respect for the other, and I think in that sense, I mean, I happen to have been in Cyprus a few years ago when there was a UN-funded, US-funded restoration project that the committee had just completed, which had a Maronite monastery. And there's a small Maronite community, and everybody agreed, whether you were Greek Cypriot or Turkish Cypriot, that the fact that this whole complex had been restored and available to the community helps intercultural dialogue, interfaith dialogue, a better understanding of the other. And I think this is one example. The Hagia Sophia Museum was another example. So let's see the implications of this. But this is what I can think. I only want to make one point, because I was listening to Tim before, and it was very interesting because you mentioned at the beginning about the transactional nature of the world. And I had never really considered the cultural aspects of that. And so through the Belt Road Initiative, there's also that dimension. And I wonder whether one way to, and you also talked about, you know, imbalances in terms of power projection. The Chinese are doing this very well. They have the potential and so on. So it might well be, I mean, if you think about Europe and the EU, culture is basically a policy within the purview of member states. It's not a community policy, right? Culture ministers meet twice a year, but together with youth and sports and whatever else. Maybe this is something that needs to be redefined at EU level, so that there is a stronger cultural component, as the EU is also dealing with the challenges from the Chinese and others. It's just an idea that came, and this is really at the level of diplomacy. And given the fact that there are so many EU member states that do feel that culture is an important element and cultural heritage of who they are, and many of the big ones and powerful ones. So this might be something to consider. But anyway, this is just an aside. But I think I gave you these two examples. Maybe Tim has more.
Tim, this is your turn.
Yeah, I would say there's good reason to be optimistic in terms of the community dimensions of the ways in which heritage is going, and two reasons I say that. One is the international heritage expert field has long tried to work itself out of this focus on the material culture, that is monuments, buildings, archaeological ruins, so on and so forth, to focus on more social and cultural understandings of heritage as living heritage. And so the last few years, that's been an explicit agenda for organizations like UNESCO to think about the communities first, and that's becoming much more mainstream than it was just even a decade or so ago. And COVID, I think, has really brought that home, the importance of that, because COVID's a crisis that hasn't led to major destruction of heritage sites. And this is a topic that another one of my PhD students here, Erin Lynn's been looking at in Central Asia around what's happening there in terms of COVID with community, the impact of COVID on communities in terms of heritage. And the observation obviously there, it's about livelihoods. Nothing's been destroyed. It's not like a war. So COVID's a crisis on heritage that's not about, that we've seen in previous times and in the ways in which we think about crisis. So there's been a real understanding that heritage is essential to issues like, which is what Dimitri's been talking about, tourism, development, economic livelihoods of groups that live around World Heritage sites. So I think COVID might actually be fast tracking that awareness that more attention needs to be paid to that. And in some respects, that means the state needs to get out of the way, as Dimitri said, and other non-state actors can really take the lead there. How it will filter through to the big players such as the Global Heritage Fund, the Getty Conservation Institute, I think that's a interesting question, because often what they want is prestigious projects. They want to save. So they want to save the great temples. They want to save the great structures that defined the glorious civilizations of humanity. And so actually really getting in the nitty-gritty of benefiting local communities and the livelihood is something they're less predisposed towards. So I think that's a culture change that has to happen in those sorts of organizations if this is genuinely going to filter through the whole sector as a whole.
Well, in previous conversation about cultural heritage in this series, there were highlighted the issue of funding, of course. Today we discussed about government and diplomacy. We didn't discuss about the role of academia in this circuit. And of course there is also a diplomacy aspect in academia. Big and renowned universities make diplomacy, are diplomacy tools. So what do you think as a last comment, and then I will ask you to summarize for 2 minutes each of you this conversation. How do you see your role as a teachers, as a professors, and the role of universities in this effort of cultural preservation? Dimitri.
Okay. I mean, I think we alluded to it a little bit. I mean, it is a specific subject, and it depends who teaches it and based on their specialization. As I said, in my university, my colleague has an architecture background, and therefore, and she also has a UNESCO chair, and she tries to deal with it within that context. So it's a very specialized group of students, and it's not a course that, I mean, is mainstream, even though there are elements as we are working, and this is, I think, universities are working on the curricula every time, even though it's a struggle, because this is one of these issues where it's about general knowledge and culture, and universities are more and more linked to the workplace, and you know, general knowledge and culture tends to suffer in that sense. But we've created courses whereby some of these courses that all the incoming freshmen have to take include some elements of this. But my experience has been as an educator, and I've been doing this more and more as I stay in this field, and every September I feel a year older than my students, which I am. The incoming freshmen are 18, and I'm getting a year older, and I always try to find ways to link the material with what I do. And I've decided that, and I've been working on track 2 stuff, track 2 format outside the main classroom. And really, based on this conversation, I've seen how I've evolved. I would do track 2 activities that were based on my specialization, which is international relations and security. And over the years, I've included elements that have to do with civil society and different panels and discussions. And there's no reason why in the next activities I will be doing, hopefully in December, I cannot have sessions on cultural heritage as well, to bring it in to the younger generations, for them to interact, to work on creating project ideas and proposals, and understanding the significance of this. So there are many ways, I mean, that universities are doing this through formal education, but also informal education. I do not know what's happening at you know, high school level or elementary school. I suspect there's an issue, because the issue has to do with that usually everything is taught through the national lenses of one's history and culture, and not much is given to the others. So universities can allow for this, but as I said, it also depends on educators themselves being willing to try and experiment new things.
Dr. Winter.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I 2 points, I think, to try and be brief. One is, I think, the really fundamental importance of interdisciplinary conversations, which Dimitri's been talking about. Get people out of their silos to become aware of the different skills that people can bring to the table. So I don't expect an archaeologist who's working on a particular site in northern Thailand to be an expert on geopolitics of the Belt and Road, but being slightly aware of what's going on might help them frame why certain funding's happening and why certain things are going on the ground. So those types of conversations are really important, and I think that's why the Fletcher School might be able to take some lead in that, in bringing some expertise from different areas together, and getting some awareness of how these issues around history, heritage, culture, religion figure into international affairs in a way that is not just about soft power. Look at maritime archaeology in the South China Sea, for example. This is not soft power stuff that's happening here. The second question, I think, is, you said, what's the role of experts and academics? Well, that's predicated on where we're looking in the world. So for example, in the Anglosphere, there's a culture and a history of academics being critical of the state. Academics often see their role as to criticize the government and state actors, whereas in other parts of the world, the experts might be serving the state. So they're very cognizant of where funding's coming from and where they might get funding, and therefore bringing experts, academics from different countries together. It's important to understand the political context within which they are working. And so there's a movement of the Association of Critical Heritage Studies that often doesn't quite understand that the context where scholars in China and India and other countries are having to fit their work within quite a constrained environment. And that means their ability to be critical is often not so open and free as it might be in other countries. So that kind of international dialogue is we need to be sensitive to that, I think, and understanding where people are doing their work and how they're trying to contribute in that international space.
Thank you. Unfortunately, our time is running over, so I will ask both of you to make 2 minutes conclusionary remarks, and then we will have to close this conversation. Please, Tim, let's begin with you this time.
Oh, I was hoping Dimitri would go first. I'm not sure if I need 2 minutes. Look, I think I'm not sure if I need 2 minutes. I would just say, look, there are many more questions on the chat board, and there's some great questions there, and that indicates that I think it's a new area. It's an important area, and there's much more dialogue that's needed, and much more awareness, and it's an important one because of what we're seeing happening in Turkey, as an example today. But there are many cases we could look at that tell us that the precariousness of minority cultures, minority groups, what I'm calling a geocultural rivalry that's emerging between sort of neo-Ottomanism, Iran, India, China. These are kind of worrying times that we're seeing here. Huntington talked about the clash of civilizations in the 1990s. We're moving on, but we've moved on from that era that he was trying to map out. But there is something, the ways in which history and heritage are being used today, that requires some solid discussion. So I think any initiatives like this are really important and valuable going forward.
Maybe we should repeat discussion like that to include all the questions that are unanswered yet. Dimitri, your final statement.
Well, I don't think I have much to say. I mean, Tim has used very good words that we've discussed. Awareness is something that's necessary. So I think to need to raise awareness, one needs to move a little bit beyond the state level, and really have an impact on society. And if I link this to the question you had before that about education and universities, we can do things with, we have the ability to do things beyond the narrow confines of our universities by doing a lot of track to work to raise awareness of this issue and dialogue. And I think this is something to do with, we need to talk about. I like the living heritage notion, which is really what this is all about ultimately. The need to have an awareness of bigger notions. I mean, the point about scholars and experts not all being the same because of where they come from and the challenges or pressures they deal with, right? So when Tim talks about Chinese scholars, well, it is a reality. And therefore their perception, never mind how trained they are and how knowledgeable they are about the issues, they're not only their perceptions, but their end goal might be totally different than that of other scholars elsewhere. And so the power dynamics is also something to consider. And so we just have to rethink of everything. I mean, it's a process, but we have to rethink of it at state level and beyond the state of how to keep this topic on the agenda. And as I said, I go back to a word I've been using a lot recently is it's an existentialist issue, which I think COVID-19 has brought out this social consciousness, which we need to capitalize on, even on this issue per se as well.
I totally agree. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for your time and your rich knowledge. Also, I want to thank Dr. Elizabeth Prodromou from Tufts University, her team, Sisi, Francois Brad, and also Reverend Aristarchos Grekas and Areti. Thank you all who you are listening, see us. Till the next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.